Welcome to the second session of part one on a critical history of our Indianapolis public schools, presented by the Charles E. Loflin and Virginia Loflin Center on the History of the Indianapolis Public Schools. Again, we're here at the Flanner House, the appropriate place, and September the 12th in 1927, that's part of why we're doing this. September the 12th in 1927 is the day Attucks opened, and we're doing it here on the 39th anniversary of that, September 12th, 2016, here at the Flanner House. Of course, I'm John Harris Loflin of the Center on the History of Indianapolis Public Schools, and this is researcher Wise, a local historian. There's his contact information. To review again what we're doing in the big picture, we're going to be looking at the fact that the Attucks documentary by Ted Green stated that it was not the Klan who created Attucks High School, but the Federation of Civic Clubs, the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce, and the Citizen School Committee, who were made up of outstanding citizens, educated, successful, most affiliated with the Protestant Church, and but asking that question, why did these upstanding citizens create a Jim Crow school system? Another question that we're going to be looking at here is that the Ted Green film exposed, if you will, that in 1927, the same month that Attucks opened, Butler started a quota of only 10 blacks per year could go to Butler. Although the film, Ted Green's film brought that up, but why did they do that? That's what we're going to try to be answering. Finally, we're going to be trying to connect the dots, not only from taking what happened in 1922 to what's happening today, and to try to connect these dots to see if there's any correlation between the same motives that created Attucks are responsible for what's going on IPS today, or the state in regard to charters, innovative schools, vouchers, etc. And finally, notice I have this underlined because for some reason, the 10 years of the Indianapolis Recorder from 1916 to 1926, around 250 missing recorded newspapers they're gone. You can't find them when you go to the library. IUPUI a couple years ago, digitized all the recorders. Of course, they didn't digitize these 10 years because they don't exist for some reason. Now, I'm not buying that personally, but it is an issue. So we want to know what happened and what are we going to do about it. That's a little side purpose of this presentation. Before we leave 1921, let's look at, again, because remember, in 1907, Indiana passed the first eugenics law, and that the eugenics movement basically felt that if we use hygiene, racial hygiene, genetic hygiene, we can prevent any crime more than going to jail will do. So we have to look at that while certain couples, they discourage certain people from having children, sterilization in some states seemed a patriotic cause and a better long-term solution to institutionalizing people who were had problems in society. We see here in Indiana in 1907, this is for a 10-year period, 20-year period, 1907 to 1937. These were the states that sterilized people. Indiana sterilized 2,500 people. California, over 20,000. We see here Georgia, 3,500. Minnesota, Virginia, for some reason, 8,300. Sterilized these people who they felt were part of the socially inadequate classes for the betterment of society, and a lot of people agreed with this, that will save money and will do will improve things if we sterilize imbeciles and other people with issues. So let's start with 1922. We're going to go through this real quick because we're going to go through 1921 and 1922 and try to understand the zeitgeist, what was going on around the world that influenced these successful, well-educated people to create a Jim Crow high school. So what I did, we're going to look closely at the 2 years that led up to that decision to create Attucks High School, when the Chamber, the Federation of Civic Clubs, the Citizens School Committee finally decided to create Attucks High School. And notice I didn't say the Klan. So we'll see how this works out. January 1st, 1922, 61 people, human beings, are lynched. 59 are black, 2 are females, so that's 57 black males were lynched in 1920. 61 in 1920, 64 in 1921. So lynching was an issue that affected the Chamber of Commerce, the Federation of Civic Clubs, Citizen School Committee, these business elites, cultural elites, political elites, social elites. There was a great interest in the number of foreign-born as opposed to born in the United States. In 1920, the total of foreign-born were over 13 million. And the number naturalized, half of those became citizens, but they weren't born here. So people were very concerned about the number of immigrants. And we'll see that part of the first Great Migration that happened before, during, and after World War I, when a lot of black and whites came from the south to the north, here to Indianapolis, also coming from Europe and other places, was immigrants. So the demographics around 1922 changed a lot. And so the people who ran the city had 2 questions to answer. Where are these new citizens of Indianapolis going to live, and where are they going to go to school? And we'll see how they answer that question. Here, February, we see here the first where a citizen, Mr. Dennison, comes to the school board and asks, how do I create a petition to create a all-colored high school? Because he wanted, with a lot of people, wanted to segregate black children into a high school. In February 3rd, 1922, the Federation of Civic Clubs formed. Wise, could you tell us a little bit about this group, the Federation of Civic Clubs?
Yes, I can, John. The Federation Civics Club consisted of political and business elites, social elites, particularly white social elites, who particularly lived in well-to-do neighborhoods on the north side of Indianapolis. They were very, very, very conscious of the constant immigration of Southern and Eastern immigrants coming into the country. Some of those Southern and Eastern immigrants were Austro-Hungarian, Slovenes, Irish, Italians, Germans, Jews, Poles, and Russians. They were very, very much aware as to who were coming into their city. And then they were also aware that now they started to see black people starting to move on the fringes of their neighborhoods. This was alarming and this was concerning because in their eyes, they had a vision for the city. And that was to, one, control how the city was going to look as far as its progressiveness, as far as its development. And it also wanted to be able to shape the ethnic populations of the city at that time, meaning if we can somehow keep blacks relegated to south of 30th Street, if we can somehow take the Jews who were living on at the particular time the south side of Indianapolis, if we can leave them over there, and then the Southern and Eastern Europeans, if we could keep them further west of Indianapolis, which would later create Manual, Washington High School, Attucks to get there, and then Shortridge would then later move. So the Federation Civics Clubs were all of these networks of business elites, social elites, people who had status, people who had power. Again, white. Meridian Hills comes to mind. North here of Indianapolis, these were people that were only concerned about their interests politically. They were only concerned about the way that their neighborhoods were going to look like. And most importantly, they were also concerned that their children were going to go to school with these people that they deemed non-white, non-Protestant. They were very much aware as to how this would impact them. This was the Federation Civics Club.
Yeah, thanks, Wise. These are some of the groups, associations here trying to control who lived in their neighborhoods. Also in February 7th, Butler Robert Ailey becomes president of Butler, and we'll see that he was the gentleman that helped carry out the move of Butler from Irvington to Fairview, and also the quota we'll talk about. March 1922, it looks like Margaret Scarvey is back in town. He was here in 21, visiting the churches, these particular churches, which brings back the subject again, we'll see later. Were there people in Indianapolis who wanted an Attucks high school? Because 2 or 3 contingents of people went to the board in late 1922 and said that we did not want Attucks. But were there people who wanted Attucks? There are some ideas in a recorder that there were certain people that met behind the scenes with the people who wanted Attucks, the Chamber, Civic Clubs people, to promote Attucks. So there could have been a Back to Africa or a Margaret Scarvey, we don't want to integrate theme here in Indianapolis. Madame Walker's daughter had an audience with the Pope. I just thought I'd put that in. It's a nice, interesting tidbit. And we're going to see here that the mayor, Lou Shank, who won the election in 21, doesn't want Butler to move to Fairview Park. He wants to sell that park and make it a municipal park. Right now, it's a private park, where people can go ride boats and things like that. The streetcar company owns it. They created that park because now to get there, they have to use the streetcar, and so that promoted the park and the streetcar at Fairview Park. April 1922. Here's a letter from the Chamber of Commerce telling the school board, we want to collaborate with you. Here's an important thing right here. A part of what I discovered that I didn't know through my research. Here's a talk by Dr. Jensen, a Butler faculty in Columbus, on saying that the race war will end white rule. He says here, the exploitation of white supremacy and colonialism by white people is a world peril. If the white race is to survive, it must learn to cooperate for human progress and more ethical civilization. Because we're going to see that it wasn't necessary that the white people didn't want to live around African Americans, go to school with African Americans, shop with African Americans. That was the issue. But what in the back of their mind was the fear that the white race, if you will, would disappear slowly through amalgamation and other issues. So they're trying to control their destiny. And he's saying, look, white people I don't know what percent of the world population is white, but it's not very much compared to the people of color. So he's saying, hey, if we don't watch out, we're going to disappear. And if we don't stop exploiting and pushing white supremacy. We see here that the Reverend Baker, a disciple minister, comes from the west side and wants a Washington high school. He's got 18 acres here, there at Washington and Belmont, called Flax Field, and he's going to the board saying, we want a Washington high school. Here, April 28th, the Indianapolis Times, Mrs. Otto J. Daisy Deeds holds a meeting with other women's groups to advocate for full segregation of black people. So this is what the Ted Green film did point out, that all there was the Chamber, the Federation of Civic Clubs, and the Citizen School Committee, there was small segregation, white supremacy groups. I don't know if she was Klan or not. I don't think so. But we'll discuss that later. May 1922. Now here we go in what Henry J. Richardson pointed out was a chess game. We saw in 1921 there were parochial school laws. Certain states had laws that required all children to go to public schools, which meant Protestant schools to the Catholics, where they would have to read the Protestant Bible. It wasn't the King James Version. It wasn't the Catholic Bible. They'd have to pray in that way. And so in order to make sure that that didn't happen, knowing that the public schools were growing, Bishop Chartrand put in plans to buy land and put $1 million into opening a Cathedral High School on 14th and Meridian. And we'll see that open, interestingly, the same month, the same year as Attucks opened. Cathedral opened at 14th and Meridian. The Federation of Civic Clubs endorses an all-black high school. So we see the people rounding up to push not only make sure that black folks weren't allowed to go to public parks to show other issues, but that they were forced into going to an all-black high school. Here's the Indianapolis Times defines what the Negro problem is, because that was the issue with a lot of people. And let's see what they said it was, basically. That blacks were being lured from the South with promises of high wages and social equality, in order to increase the Republican vote. And that folks are coming here, they're being deceived, they get disappointed, and they turn to crime. June 1922, we see not only will Butler have a quota on blacks, Harvard was going to have a quota on Jews. June 13th, President Eli, in his graduation speech, says this: one should be obedient to the law. The main characteristic of Anglo-Saxon supremacy everywhere is found in the attitude toward the law. So this is in his DNA. This is in Butler's DNA. This is in the DNA of the culture here, that Anglo-Saxon supremacy was just the way the world is, and it's okay if we talk about it. And so this had to influence, I'm arguing, why Butler ended up having a quota of only 10 blacks per year to go to Butler. Here's George Beeman from the Federation of Civic Clubs asking the board for an all-black high school. So all these organizations are lining up to create an all-black high school. Mrs. Arlo J. Deeds comes to the school board and says she wants an all-black high school. The administration of Harvard says basically, look, this makes sense to us. If we only allow 15%, if the maximum of 15% of the student body would be Jews, then we would prevent further anti-Jewish action. So they didn't want to try to solve the problem per se. They just wanted to kind of, if we reduce the number of Jews, then that will reduce the problem. July 1922, the Chamber wants IPS to create an all-black high school. Here's the committee members of that: Hilton U. Brown, Phil Zoker, even George Buck from Shortridge wants a all-black high school. Lee Burns, Charles Berry. We'll see more about who these people are. There's a protest. 300 people gather in Irvington to protest Butler's move. There were some people that did not want Butler to move to Fairview. They wanted Butler to stay there in Irvington, and so they protested. The Federation of Civic Clubs backs Butler's move. Could you tell us a little bit about the Chamber of Commerce, Wise?
Yes, I can, John. All right, the Chamber of Commerce is just an extension. It's just a network of the Federation Civics Club. It's just that, as a matter of fact, there's just not, they're one and the same. Their operations, their outlook, their attitude towards the other, meaning black, towards non-white, towards non-Protestant, was the same. This is very evident after World War I. White rage in Indianapolis is boiling. There's a lot of immigration. There's a lot of issues that are going on in the country that whites, this white nationality is starting to exude in the city of Indianapolis now, definitely after World War I. After World War I, the city is divided. You have black and you have whites, but then you have a particular white. This was the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce does not want to be associated with anything that's not of its pedigree. Anything that does not fit in its paradigm as to what they think is white and Protestant, they want out of here. So the Chamber goes to the IPS board and says, yo, we need to create another school based off this TB, based off the TB phenomenon that was going on in black communities, as they would say. And not just that, based off the fact that they felt that black kids were not ready to deal with white institutions. That was the main point. They had this idea that the Chamber did, and the Federation Civics Club have this idea that black children were not suited to learn the same way that white children needed to learn. So when Attucks, and not to get ahead of myself, but when they're coming to the IPS school board, they already have in their mind what this school should look like and what these children should learn: domestic service type of jobs. This is what Attucks is going to be filled with. So the Chamber of Commerce are power elites, shakers and movers, people who are going to be able to move legislation, move policy around their political interests. But this is the key. The Chamber of Commerce, even though it was ran by lawyers, presidents of neighborhood associations, people who ran the Indianapolis Board of Trade, people who were in charge of major corporations in the city of Indianapolis, even though these were powerful power brokers, these people were deeply influenced by white residential neighborhoods. People, middle class whites, and well-to-do whites were deeply influential of the chamber in making sure that the chamber was always going to push forward their initiative. So going to the school board wasn't just the chamber's idea, it was the chamber being pressured and being influenced by white communities who saw this encroachment of blacks coming into their neighborhood on the fringes, and who also saw this encroachment of now Catholics, Jews wanting equity, wanting power. They had to do something about this. And one of the ways to do something about this was to set in motion a segregated school system, but not just the school system. The school system was the springboard as to how other initiatives were going to start to pop off.
Yeah, Wise, that's correct. And we see here in July 22, again, let me point out, this is not the Klan, it's the Chamber of Commerce. And here's what they said. They made this resolution that basically be it resolved that we have a comprehensive high school system that's separate, modern, and completely equipped and adequate for students of color. August 1922, Butler protests again that, look, you promised you was going to stay in Irvington forever and you're leaving, and we don't like it. One of the prominent Indy Star columnists and residents of Irvington, Grace Julian Clark, even suggested that they want this move because there's some people who own property in Fairview. And so they're going to make some money off of this move. And she was probably right, because here's two articles from the paper, Indianapolis Star, buy in Forest Ridge and do it quick. Move out to Irvington, out to Fairview. Cash in on a great opportunity. Here's Butler right here, and this is the neighborhood that might have not been developed, but was going to be developed, that's for sure, once Butler moved out to Fairview Park. September 1922, we're getting closer to the decision to create Attucks High School. Here's an issue here that Irvington to Fairview argument for Butler moving out to Fairview, that if Butler moves out, we'll build Butler for a better future of the city. Half a page dedicated to the idea in the Star that city vitality will be affected by giving a city a real university. And Wise, could you tell us more about that decision by Butler and the city, their argument that having Butler move to Fairview Park would be benefit everybody in town?
Yes, I can, John. Well, let's just start with this, plain and simple. Again, like I said earlier, 1907 and 1908, there's a period where the civic leaders, again, they're thinking about progressively how is the city going to look, reshaping, rebuilding the city of Indianapolis. Butler plays a huge part in this because the city's power brokers want Butler to promote sports, athletics. So this is a major thing. This is a major thing for them. Now, George Kessler, whose Kessler Street heading east or west is named after, George Kessler comes into Fairview and he looks at the campus that they have at he looks at the campus that they have in Irvington at that moment. And he says, well, the campus is fine as far as academically, but if you're looking to make this a sports mecca, a collegiate world as far as sports, you're going to have to move. To me, my theory is that this is one of the impetuses for them to leave Irvington to go to Fairview, because they have more land to build what we now know as Hinkle Fieldhouse, and then later, like I've said in the first part of the presentation, the Butler Bowl, seating 100,000 people. George Kessler is influential because he is the architect. He is going to design the outlay of how Butler is to look like. He's the specialist. He's the one that they're going to. So he tells them that, hey, you need to move. In order for you to live out this vision, to move forward with this vision, you got to move to Fairview. By looking at the landscape of Fairview, Fairview was the perfect spot to make all of this happen. And like I've said earlier, their dreams came crashing down because at that time of 27, 3 years later, the Depression hits. So they have to reconsider and reshape that plan.
Yeah, Wise, Kessler Boulevard and Kessler's plans for Indianapolis are still with us. I like driving along Kessler Boulevard, but we see here September 19th, a petition from the Education Committee for an all-black high school from the Chamber of Commerce. George Buck, the principal of Shortridge, goes to the school board and says, yes, I want an all-black high school. I guess he didn't want to have has the students mixing with black children and Southern European children and anybody other than a certain group of people. A group comes and a delegation again for a Washington high school, a West Side high school. Holy Trinity Church in Hallville does a survey, and we find out on the West Side, as you said, are mainly Slovenians, Polish, Hungarian, Bohemian, Bulgarians who would be going to church, going to school at Shortridge. But if there was a Washington high school, that would not happen. October, IU goes to the school board, and wants to offer classes in eugenics at Shortridge. Again, eugenics, racial hygiene, saying that certain people need to have children and certain people do not need to have children, should not have children. And in fact, we may end up sterilizing some to make sure they don't have children. Eugenics becomes a popular idea. In fact, they want eugenics classes at Shortridge. So the people who are members of the Federation of Civic Clubs, the Chamber, other groups are being influenced by this. The Jewish community, like the Catholic community, knows that they're going to have to expand or they're going to be forced to go to public schools. And we see here that a new Jewish synagogue is to be erected on 34th Street, that the temple down at 10th and Delaware, which is just north of the interstate there on Delaware, it's a big place, is too small. Again, a delegation comes to the board from the Chamber of Commerce and the Citizens School Committee wanting a Shortridge High School. They said it's a North Side High School. So now we're getting people coming in wanting a Washington High School, wanting a black high school, if you will, wanting a Catholic high school, wanting a Jewish schools, and now wanting Shortridge to move from downtown, where it was at Delaware and Pennsylvania, Michigan, to move up to 34th Street. Here's a bill in Oregon saying that students in public school, all students must go to public schools. The Scottish Rite Masons like the bill. It's similar to a bill, however, that was just defeated in Michigan 2-1, that all students have to go to public schools. October 31st, Indy Blacks go to a big meeting at the Indiana Theater, supporting all Republican politicians, because back then the black folks were members of the Republican Party. In fact, we'll see that the Klan really wasn't worried about African Americans. They were more concerned about the Catholics and the Jews and other entities, because they knew the African Americans would vote Republican. November 1922, the school board commissioner moved to create a West Side High School, a Washington High School, and a site for Attucks is discussed. November 21st, Lee Brokenberg and others come to present the first pushback against creating an Attucks High School. I forget how many people were there. Prominent people, prominent African Americans in the city, professionals came and said, we don't want Attucks High School. Butler announces that the deal for Fairview Park will be closed December 31st, in spite of the protest, evidently. And a group again protests in all-black high school. It's a much bigger group with 16 people come with Mr. Brokenberg, Senator Brokenberg, a lawyer as well, to say, no, we don't want an Attucks High School. Let's look at December 22nd real close. December 5th, we have a star editorial saying the Butler that is to be, needs to happen. They're praising that, and it will be looking into the future, 50 years ahead into the future, it will contribute to a still greater Indianapolis. Another delegation comes to support the to fight against the Attucks High School, and one of the delegates says insidious forces are behind the move to create an Attucks High School, and that this move is being spread by the Chamber of Commerce. And we'll see here in May 1922, the IPS had 11% of its population was black. A total of almost 75,000 students. Looks like 90% were white and only 11% black. But that was enough to want certain people to create an Attucks High School. December 13th, the board votes unanimously for an Attucks High School. So all that protest didn't work. It was going to be up at 21st and MLK at that time, Northwestern. The superintendent Grass says, look, we have 800 black students, and they're in schools. This shows that they want to be educated, and we need to provide the best place and chance for them to develop initiatives, self-reliance, by way of qualified black teachers. So that's his rationale for the school boards, since he's the superintendent of the schools, for creating Attucks High School. December 26th, day after Christmas, the board president recommends that we have Washington High School. She wants it to be called the School of Commerce. It becomes Washington High School instead, and that the purchase of a land for Attucks High School. The Citizen School Committee, the Chamber of Commerce, comes up and says, we like this and we need to hurry up to save money. And finally, Butler completes the Fairview deal. So everything's lined up now. We've got the Washington High School. We're going to move Shortridge up to 34th and Meridian. We'll see here where we're going to give some money to expand Manual, and we'll have an Attucks High School. So all this happened together. According to Henry J. Richardson, it was one big deal. Let's look here real quick at what I'll refer to in the future as, and I'll explain it as the Mine Trust in 1922. We'll talk about what the Mine Trust is now, but let's look closely at this group of educators that Ted Green pointed out created Attucks High School. The Chamber, Citizen School Committee, Federation of Civic Clubs, we'll see Indianapolis News was a part of it, Butler and Shortridge was a part of it. And here is explaining, we'll see here that Atherton, who was the head of Butler financing to get money to move the school out to Fairview Park, was a part of that. He was a member of the Chamber, a member of the Citizen School Committee, and he was on the Butler board. A.V. Brown was a lawyer and a banker, and he was on the Butler board. So he had some connections here. Hilton U. Brown was not only with the Chamber, but he was with the Indianapolis News. He was the president of the News. Let's see here. He was from the News from 1882 to 1959, where he became the managing editor and soon the head of the board of directors. He was a member of the board of directors at Butler and became the head of the board from 1903 to 1954. We see George Buck, the principal of Attucks High School. We see Lee Burns here. Looks like Lee Burns was involved in a lot of things on the Chamber, on the Citizen School Committee, on the Butler board. He was the architect and the treasurer of the Citizen School Committee, and like I said, a member of the Butler board. Edgar Evans, who was the chair of the Citizen School Committee, was the owner of Acme Evans, a flour mill down in Washington and White River. And finally, Thomas Carhowe, who was a Butler University president, ran for in a Republican primary for mayor but lost, and lived in Irvington. He was a part of the Chamber, Citizen School Committee, and Butler. So these people ran around together. They were in the same organizations, and they worked together to create an Attucks High School. Notice here, everyone, that I do not have the Klan listed here. Why don't I have them listed here? Because they weren't a part of this decision-making process to create Attucks High School, which Ted Green pointed out so well in his documentary. All right, let's go to 1923 real quick. So 1921 and 22, we went in more depth, but we're not going in depth that much here from 23 to up to 29. But we still have to know what was going on in town to affect the Chamber, Federation of Civic Clubs, the Citizens School Committee, these upstanding, successful business people, community leaders, political, cultural, social elites in town to create a Jim Crow school. The Indianapolis White Supremacy League was founded, who basically say, we respect blacks who do not want to be social equals and who respect that the white authority is the authority of the United States. So if you know your place, we're cool with you. Indianapolis Times, in an editorial called White Supremacy, basically says that Europe alone can't maintain white supremacy. The hope for the world is being 100% American, born in America, speaking English, being American, using white supremacy as a solution to social problems. It uses U.S. Jim Crow law as an example of how white supremacy works. And so they support the intentions of the Klan. So the newspaper, and back, I'll go ahead a little bit, to what extent does the Indianapolis Star and a Chalkbeat and a recorder today contribute to the same sort of mindset that created Attucks High School? Here's another issue here. We have to understand this was William Jennings Bryant from the Talk to the Southern Society and Negro. I think he was the lawyer for the Scopes trial. I'm not sure. That the so-called Negro no longer it's not a Southern issue. It's moved to the North and out West. Explicit, he says, he endorses segregation and voting restrictions for blacks. He calls whites the advanced race and praised the superiority of laws made by white folks. He notes the survival of white race supersedes egalitarian principles. So our survival supersedes any democratic senses of equality and equity. We see that the Fiery Cross, which is the Klan newspaper, has an editorial in it. Yay, Butler. Here it is, February 9, 1923, basically saying, and I'll get a different picture of this, but that's what was in the Klan newspaper. Basically, it says, our wonderful Arsenal Tech boys are going to go to Indianapolis, and we have faith now that they're going to succeed. 73 years ago, Butler started and incorporated at Northwestern University, located at 13th and College, down there where the interstate is, 13th in Alabama, and that Butler is rich in the tradition of Christianity and education and a firm place in the hearts of our sons. We greet you, Butler. There are happy Butlers moving to Fairview Park. We see here, 1924 in July, that the White Supremacy League tosses a grenade into a house, a black family, probably on the west side, close to 30th Street, a form of terrorism. We have terrorists actually committing terrorist acts in 1924. I don't know what became of that, and I'm not sure what the date was. It couldn't have been, I couldn't have found this in the recorder because the recorder is missing from this date. I probably found it in the Star. The Indiana Jewish Chronicle wants a new North Side Hebrew school so that it has places for Jewish children to go so they don't have to go to the public Protestant schools. And the board announces almost $3 million to create some high schools. Shortridge has created the most. It must be, they get $1.5 million. Attucks, Washington gets $500,000. Attucks gets $500,000. And in addition, Emmanuel gets $400,000. So they only expect 1,000 students at Attucks in Washington and 2,500 at. But both schools, all three schools, are well built. Remember, here was this is what they built this addition back here. Here's the synagogues again, right there. I can't say the Sarah Tefla, the United Hebrew Congregations right here, and the Sarah Taffel is right here. And down the street was the Peddler's Shul, the poor synagogue, down at a couple blocks from here. So that's the part that Manuel got. This is part of the trade-offs. We'll give Shortridge for the well-to-do. We'll create a Washington High School on the other side of Washington Street. We'll create attics for the blacks, and we'll build additions to Manual High School. That was what Henry J. Richardson called the trade-offs at that time. You'll get this, we'll get that, and everybody will get what they want, or if they don't want it, they're going to get it anyway. 1923, Jewish Chronicle says Harvard drops its anti-Jewish enrollment policy. The Indy Star, our own Indy Star, warns of the melting pot as a menace to Americanism, declared at the St. Paul Methodist Bible class. Amalgamation of the races is the biggest threat to 100% Americanism. Broad Ripple High School opens as a part of IPS. It was its own system. I don't know what date. Here's an issue we'll see early next is that Clay Trusty, who was the minister at the 7th Christian on Udell and Annette, right over here on the other side of, I think it's on the other, just west of the post office here on MLK. And he has a problem with the Klan and other issues because the disciples were, a lot of Klan visited disciples' churches, gave them money, and they set up, the Disciples of Christ sets up a special committee to look into that. And he resigns in October 14th, 1923. 2 days later after he announced that. He dies in 1924. We'll see what this is all about later. 1925, the so-called Nordic movement, the white supremacy movement that the Jewish Chronicle wants us to be aware of. It manifests in the Klan and in fundamentalist Christianity. In 1925, so here we're up to the next election. We had an election back in 1921 in November. Now we're going to go to the next election in 1925, where the Citizen School Committee is now up against the Klan school slate, which is called, I forget what it was called here, United Protestant movement. And Wise, could you tell us a little bit about this election in 1925, please?
Yes, I can, John. 1925, this is a crucial moment. Citizen School Committee and the Klan. The Klan under the guise under the United Protestant school slate. Again, I reiterate, after World War I, this is a crucial moment because the Klan comes out of nowhere. The reason why? The Klan is looking for a more revitalization of the city of Indianapolis. The Klan has felt like the people who have gotten into government are not listening to their politics, are not making sure that they're going through with some of the initiatives or political stances that they want. So to the Klan, this 1925 election is not just about schools. This is about a more revitalization that can start with the school from the students that goes into the homes, and therefore from the homes, so from the schools to the homes to the society. Because the Klan was not interested into ideology, but they were more interested in patronage. Klan and segregation movements were independent of each other. The Klan really wasn't concerned about segregation in the context that people who were not white social elites who were non-Klan members were. So the Klan comes in with this idea that they want to create a moral revival within the city of Indianapolis. And the one way they're going to do that is by creating this mass hysteria within the city that, look here, no one is listening to us. Look at the degradation that are going on in our neighborhoods. Look at the degradation that is going on in our cities. One particular element is prohibition. Prohibition was a huge thing because the Klan felt that it was prohibition that was deteriorating the moral values of our homes. Alcohol was. And then not just that, going back to what you said, though, John, Indianapolis is becoming more ethnically diverse, not just with black blood, but with this Southern and Eastern European blood. It's no longer 100% Americanism. You no longer just have a full city of just white Protestants. Now you have Catholics and Jews who are joining in the fight, at sometimes with blacks. So now you got these coalitions. The Klan is concerned. The Klan feels like the people who are in power now are not doing nothing to do away with this concern. But the Citizen School Committee, on the other hand, they say, well, you know what? we see what the Klan is talking about, but we're not so much concerned about this moral revitalization as opposed we're more concerned about our kids not going to school with black kids, our kids not going to school with Southern and Eastern European immigrants, our kids not going to school with Jews and Catholics. That's what the Citizen School Committee was concerned about, creating a school districts that were going to segregate, giving their children a privilege, the power, and them the privilege and power to send their kids and educate their kids freely how they wanted to. But along with that, the Citizen School Committee was also about the segregation of housing, the segregation of jobs. The Klan was about moral revival. So the point that I'm going to bring it on home to is that you had two white groups who were fighting, one fighting over ideology to a certain extent about segregation and the way that segregation can look in our city and how we can use it as a tool to make our political interests move forward. But then you got another group that's like, look here, we're looking for people to go along with this moral revival. Though. We're looking for people that are going to want to have some type of idea that what is happening in our city is deteriorating our moral values in our family. It's deteriorating the Protestant white nationalist structure that we see is so precious to our well-being. So you got the Klan and the Citizen School Committee vying for power, using the schools as the springboard to push forward their white initiatives.
2 points that you brought out. Thornborough, Dr. Emily Thornborough, a professor of history at Butler, made the point, which is true, that Attucks would have happened without the Klan, that the public schools are already segregated, not at the high school level, but at the grade school level. As well, to give you an example of the Klan's sense of moral revival, they had what they call the Horse Thief Detective Act. It was an act where I could deputize you if we needed somebody to find a bank robber. So what they did, though, was deputize a bunch of people, and they went down these country roads to find out, because back then, the car was just coming out, so a young man and a young woman would be going down these country roads and find a nice place to maybe have a nip and to kiss. And they would find them and make them go because they were concerned that this was their moral behavior. That was something the Klan did. Again, the Klan wins that school board election, and the Citizen School Committee is out of power. Again, the Klan wins this election. The mayor, the city council, the governor, and the school board. 1926, January 30th, the recorder of the White People's Protection League declares north of 30th Street white territory. February 9th, the Star, the board says 34th and Meridian site for Shortridge is too small. Remember, it may have up to 250,000 students, and it was proposed for 1,800. And the committee suggests 46th and Central. Despite protests, the board picks 40th and Central site. We'll go and look at that real quick. Here's where they wanted school. Here's School 70. They're on the northeast corner of 46th and Central. That 70 was already there. They were going to build Shortridge right here. That way, the students could go to 70, catty corner over to Shortridge, and down the street to Butler. A nice plan. It didn't work out. We'll see here that, so they picked that site, and we'll see here too, we'll go to that. Right in that same time frame, the mayor of Indianapolis signs this race bill that nobody could live north of 30th Street. We'll see what that meant. No black people, and unwritten that Jews could not live north of 30th Street, which may have had something to do with 34th Street, and maybe they wanted to move any farther, even north, so that they wouldn't have to rub shoulders with African Americans. That race bill, we'll find out, was found unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, some people went to the Supreme Court and said Attucks is illegal, if you will, and the Supreme Court says no, and upholds the creation of Attucks High School. The board, here the board purchased the land at 40th and Central. The next day, they reversed their decision, and the segregation ordinance that was passed by the mayor is found unconstitutional. Interesting concept. Here's 70, across the street to Shortridge, down the street to Butler. This is the perfect setup. Didn't work out, though. Nice idea. Here's the segregation ordinance that came in March 1926, basically saying the ordinance passed forbidding Negroes to live in white communities and white people to live in Negro communities without the written consent of a majority of the people in that community affected or interested. So it wasn't so much, maybe they tried to, it was found illegal, it didn't matter, but they tried to say that black folks could prevent whites from moving into the neighborhood if a majority said that was a bad thing. This is a chapter in Butler's history that a lot of Butler people don't want us to know about. And remember, we looked at Reverend Clay Trusty back in, I forget what month that was, and he had some problems with the Klan and the church, and he quit that church up here at Udell and Eugene. But this gentleman here was the Reverend Gerald L.K. Smith. He was a disciple pastor, an anti-communist, anti-Jew, a far-right rebel rouser, what some people say. He joined the the American, what's it called? The Share the Wealth of Huey Long's campaign, right here. We'll see he left Indianapolis and went down and joined Huey Long in Louisiana to do that. He was with his Share the Wealth campaign. He wanted to spread the wealth around among the rich and the poor. He led the National Christian Crusade. He joined the American Fascist Silver Shirts, who were a fascist group before the Nazis took over Germany. And he had the American First campaign against us entering into World War II. He endorsed white supremacy and supported Senator Theo Bilbo. Smith's Committee of a Million had 3 million followers. He was a great orator, and he tried to mix the flag and the cross together to promote his ideology. But let's look at, we see that in 1923, Reverend Trusty resigns at the Christian Church on Udell and Annette. The next year, early in the next year, they bring in the Gerald L.K. Smith to be the head of that church. In 1926, he resigns that church over here just west of the post office and goes to this church right here, the former University Park Christian Church. This is the school right across from what school again? 34?
43.
My bad. 43. They're on 142 West 40th Street. The building's still there. I've always wondered what it was, and I did some research. It was originally the University Park Church in 22, then became the Capitol Avenue Christian Church. But let's look back here. So in September 1928, anticipating the opening of Butler, he creates this church, and it becomes the official church of Butler University, the church I just showed you there. He also becomes Butler's minister of the chapel of the School of Religion, which makes him college chaplain. A lot of people who love Butler don't want this information. It's hard to find that information about who Gerald L.K. Smith is and what he did. During the time between the church over here, west of the post office, and his work at Seventh Christian, he had 1,600 new members come to be a part of it. Quite an orator, quite a rebel rouser, made people walk down the aisle and commit to Christianity, Protestantism. He left in 1929 to go down to work with Huey Long, or down in Louisiana, where he finally ended up working with Huey Long. Again, that's the place. 1927. 1927, the construction of the Butler Fieldhouse begins. Huge place, big place. Man, it was the first building to open on campus. So you go up to Fairview now, and you imagine everything gone except this big, gigantic building, huge building. Madame Walker announces that Madame Walker Bldg is announced in February. A lot of trade-offs are happening right now. You get this, we'll get that. The Butler Board Committee discusses the Butler quota. Lee Burns is a part of Hilton U. Brown, Irving, and President Ailey. St. Pat's Church catches on fire. There were several, due to the anti-parochial laws. A lot of people didn't like Catholics, if you will, and in Canada and in the U.S., Catholic churches were burned. And so St. Pat's caught on fire, and also Our Lady of Lourdes. And so again, we're taking the Ted Green film concept of the events that happened around Attucks, and we're bringing in class, geography, religion, ethnicity into this big picture that the film started about Attucks High School. Here, a house was bombed, according to the recorder. Now the recorder's in. Remember, the recorder comes back into, we can see the recorders in 1926, 1927. We see here that a house was bombed on 501 West 29th, just south of 30th Street, so there must have been some movement of folks moving north, and another terrorist attack right here in America in 1927 against other Americans. Butler writes the Indy Black YMCA confirming that they're only going to allow 10 students per year to come to Butler. September 12th, Attucks opens. The same month, the same year, we'll see that that's when this quota was announced to the Crispus Attucks community. George Washington opened September, the same month, the same year as Attucks, at Belmont, one block on the other side of Belmont into Center Township. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. And Cathedral opens the same month, the same year as Attucks. So we have, a lot of people don't know that, but Attucks opened in 27, September the 12th. George Washington opened the same day, and probably the same month, around the same week, Cathedral opens at 14th and Meridian. And Butler imposes this quota up here, and the recorder reacts with this editorial. You know why that Butler wants to limit the number of black students to go to Butler? It's because we present too much college spirit. We also have poor grades and baggy pants and rolled up socks, and paint should be paint on our face, and powders. And we go along with empty hilarity. And none of our alumni have given money to the to Butler. So racism is not mentioned. It's self-blame. December 26, 1927, Madame Walker Bldg opens up. There's the Butler Fieldhouse, huge place. Let's see here. This is the letter from Butler to the Y. We'll look at that letter closely. But this is something that came out in 1907 about Butler that shows what Butler was and hopefully will be now. Butler was the first institution in the world of colleges to open its doors to females on exactly equal terms to males. It has stood since its inception for the broadest cultural to all who has desired it. There's been no discrimination against anyone on account of sex or race, except for, this is the letter. Well, they don't explain why. He just tells the YMCA, we're going to do this, and says from now on, we're going to have different ways of allowing students to come, enrollment, physical fitness, character recommendations, and but we have to restrict the number of blacks to 10. Let's look at the enrollment in Butler. 1923 to 1924 looks like about 12,000 students. Half were female, half were male. Butler now is the second only to IU in attendance in this year of 1,200 students, 1,300. In 1925, we have 1,400, of which about half and half, male, female. But people of color are 61, 22 male to 39 female. So they want to turn this number, restricted to 10. The Catholics at the school were 76. The Jewish students were 32 of those. The next, later on that fall, we see that there are 50 African Americans, 29 are female. And again, a little more females in the school than males. In June of 1927, on both campuses, the Irvington campus and the Fairview campus, looks like more students, about half and half, and 500 new freshmen. In October 1929, the total is 1,700, almost 1,800. We see here after the quota that now only 14 black students, new or 9, because remember the quota was 10, so 9 new ones. And that these were the freshmen were coming in from Shortridge, about 140 freshmen from Shortridge, Tech 125, Manual had about 20, Cathedral 24, Attucks 8. Again, no explanation. This is the way it is. And recorded 1928, pointing out that, again, black migration, the second great migration, is causing grave problems in the North. Butler Fieldhouse opens March the 7th. It appears that a group of 41 corporate businessmen put money together to create this for the Circle City as well as Butler, this great stadium, at the cost of $750,000, which would be about $10 million in today's money. The issue is still rising up, even after Attucks opened, that there were certain black Judases, according to Mr. Maloney, who went undercover to create Attucks High School, and that Indy was unwittingly signaling her spiritual defeat by creating Attucks High School. Is that what I'm saying there? Yes. May 4th, the Fountain Square Bldg opens. Shortridge opens September the 10th at 34th Meridian, and Butler opens at Fairview Park the same day of the same month there. So what we're seeing here is that here was the trade-off again, according to Henry J. Richardson. We'll build Attucks for the African Americans. We'll build Washington for the West Siders. We'll add space to Manual High School for the Italians, the Germans, the poor white, and the Jewish students. We'll move Shortridge up to 34th Street, and Shortridge, since a lot of its students went to Butler University. In fact, Butler was called the Shortridge Annex. That was all planned to have Butler and Shortridge open, move at the same time, and open in September 1928. All a part of one big plan. Since I think nothing happened accidentally, I'm going to argue that the Walker Building, which opened in September 1926, and the Fountain Square Building, which opened in May of 1928, were connected as part of that trade-off. You'll get Madame Walker, but we'll get Fountain Square Building. And if we remember back in the first presentation that Henry J. Richardson said there's 3 Klan cells in Indianapolis: Riverside, Brightwood, and Fountain Square. So this could have been a part of that trade-off. You get Madame Walker, we get the Fountain Square Building. A lot of the brick, a lot of the terracotta are the same. Both of them on angle streets at the end of Virginia, at the end of Indiana Avenue. (1929), a slate chosen by the revitalized Citizen School Committee wins that election and beats out the Klan School Board. According to Butler's Thornborough, we have to remember that there were a lot of people who wanted people to think that the Klan created Attucks High School, which removed them from any association with creating Attucks High School. And they perpetuated this probably all through the last, since 1927, that the Klan built Attucks High School when it did not. And the Ted Green film and the research I've been doing over the last 35 years, and even Thornborough says, no, that story is being pushed by people who want to avoid being responsible for Attucks High School. October 29th, which you mentioned, was the Wall Street crash. So let's connect the dots. The question that Ted Green's film brought out to us, to me and Wise, is the same circumstances or the same philosophical, political, cultural point of view towards education and certain people who are not the majority, white European Protestants, if you will, not so much. It's not so much religion today, from my estimation, but class is the issue, because we have successful middle class African Americans, middle class Jewish, a lot of middle class. So what we have is maybe a dichotomy of certain classes go to the charters, go to the Protestant, to the parochial schools, to the magnets, to the special schools, and others go to not schools that are not so special. So we'll see here that we're arguing here that the same elites that created Attucks, the Federation of Civic Clubs, Citizen School Committee, the Chamber of Commerce, are now a part of the Mind Trust, the Stand for Children, and the Democrats for Education Reform movement, now controlling IPS. That's a question. Is that happening? In fact, this gentleman here says, Mr. Kimball, that the pro-reform coalitions that the Mind Trust, Stand for Children, Education Reform people that support the privatization of the public schools, says that these coalitions tend to be dominated by business and political elites and supported by neighborhoods with large concentrations of highly educated middle-class professionals. The same scenario that was in the 1920s, where people were trying to make sure that certain people didn't move in their neighborhoods, certain people went to certain schools, etc. The same, this is, I forget when he put that out, 2007 right here. He's seeing the same issue happening today that happened then. In fact, let's look at two newspaper articles. Here's proof, 2014, 2015. Here's one that the three candidates, Commissioner Bentley, Commissioner Sullivan, Commissioner Eccles, were all supported by the Chamber. They came out and they support these candidates. In fact, we'll see here that Commissioner Sullivan's husband is, I think, on the board of the Chamber of Commerce today. Here's another one, the next, that David Harris of the Mind Trust with Mr. Hubbard, who's the president of the Chamber of Commerce, they go to the state saying that the education budget is threatening educational progress. Now, I may disagree what they mean by progress. On the surface, this is a great thing to do, to be concerned about the budget of schools. But my point is that these are the same educational elites. In fact, one of my friends calls the current school board and the current federal school reform movement that these are the great-great-great-grandchildren of the people in 1922. Not directly, but metaphorically, that the people who are running the school board now, the people who are running the educational system in Indianapolis, the Chamber of Commerce, is still trying to control the Indianapolis public schools. In fact, I would argue that the Chamber of Commerce has been in charge of IPS over the last 120 years. So this is not new. One more point. They had an issue, I think it was in the spring, that that some of the Shortridge families that live north in Indianapolis, there was an issue about who was going to the north side CFI schools. And a lot of debates occurred around why certain IPS schools and parents described as white, wealthy, and north side were given preference by the board in regard to where a Center for Inquiry school would be in their neighborhood. So again, we're having the same white professionals concerned with their children getting a special schools and other people not. Again, I've got the link to that article. Why IPS schools are mostly white and wealthy. That was the issue. I don't know if it's been resolved. One more question here. Again, what happened to the recorders? And what are we going to do about it? They're supposedly missing. I'm not buying that. They're probably gone now for sure if they were around. And again, these are the missing recorders from very important years when all of the Klan, the school board, all the things that we talked about here were happening. And we won't ever get the point of view of black journalists about these events. We won't get the point of view of black Indianapolis people about these events in the recorder. It's a mystery, and I don't want people to forget that they're not there. We forgot two whys before we close. The second part of our question was, why did Butler have a quota? My thesis is that in 1926, when they passed the law that no blacks and Jews could live north of 30th Street, Butler may have, before they moved, was going to take all their black students up to Fairview Park, but then realized, oh my God, with that law, even though it was found unconstitutional, if we take our black students north of 30th Street up to Fairview Park, it's going to cause a lot of problems. And so they threw the black community underneath the bus in order to move to Fairview Park. What's your thesis? What's your idea of why Butler's quota had a quota of only 10 blacks per year could go to Butler?
My particular theory as to why Butler had the quota, again, I agree with you, John. I believe it had something to do with white empowerment, white supremacy, white ideology, the racial indifference that white social elites north of 30th Street had towards black people. If you look at the landscape of that area prior to Butler over there, it's well-to-do white people. Blacks are not moving out there. The first blacks that move out there are south of Butler, Tarkington on 41st, over there on 41st in Illinois. So, again, they're not moving way out north.
And that happened in the 50s?
It starts the 40s, 50s. And by late 50s, that South Butler, the south side, that southern portion of Butler, Tarkington is predominantly all black. By the late 50s, by 55, it's really all black. But before 55, starting in the early 40s, black families are now starting to test the limits, basically test the patience of white residents in that area, and they're starting to move to the fringes of those well-to-do neighborhoods. So they're no longer living in the slums, the bottoms, Kincaid's Hole. They're no longer living in what will later become Ransom Place and the Flanner House homes. These people saw themselves better than that. Henry J. Richardson was a pioneer in that in the sense that he moved across over from 30th Street and moved over. So in that sense, I think the whole quota was tied to the idea that, again, the city's power brokers saw the city being white. They wanted to keep it that way. They wanted to relegate blacks to a particular part of the city, and they wanted to control the schools, control the jobs, control housing, control the social dynamics of what the city was going to look like.
Then that begs the question, Wise, is there still a quote unquote quota at Butler today? Maybe this argument will spur some investigation into some percentages of the student body there at Butler. But basically, what the Charles E., what our my mom and dad's Center on the History of IPS proposes that some of these papers that were talking about specific important issues be recreated by certain citizens and historians and journalists and newspaper people to create at least a couple, so I'm going to say there were several important recorders I'd love to have read. And maybe we can recreate them in that spirit because we have other papers who cover these stories. But that's just an idea that we have how to deal with this fact that the recorders are missing. So basically, let's summarize what we're doing. This is the Indiana that was started back in 1816. We'll see here there's a white male pioneer. I don't see any women in there. I don't see any children. I don't see any African Americans, any Native Americans. The animals are being pushed out, and the vegetation is being cut down. And what's left is the white male with the patriarchal sun coming over the horizon. Hopefully now, this argument, the Ted Green film, and what we're doing will push for a Indiana that looks like this. More diverse, with representing more of the cultures, respecting the plant life, the animal life, and of course, this gentleman stays in because he's part of the diversity. We don't want to get rid of him, if you will. He's a part of the diversity here. And maybe this is the Indiana that will come in the future as a result of us trying to point out this history of the Indianapolis Public Schools. Again, I'm John Loflin, wise researcher, local historian. This is our contact information. And I'd like to thank Flanner House. And this is our presentation.